Introductory Lecture. Gentlemen, the discourse, which I have this day the honor to address to you, opens the 16th session of Calcutta Medical College. Its past history has been placed before you already in the introductory lecture of my colleague, Dr. H. Goodeve, but I will very briefly revert to some parts of it here. Our college was instituted in 1835. Two assistant surgeons of the Bengal Army, Messrs. R.C.F. Uspach, Bramley and Goodeve, Avere appoint, ed. to instruct the students in the various branches of medical science. To them, in conjunction avith the Avorthi Pundit Madhusudan Guptu, belong the honor introducing into India the study of anatomy by practical dissections. I of us present in 1838, with some avum, I have the pleasure to meet here this day, upon the interesting occasion of giving the 4 first-passed students their medical diplomas. The success of our college was felt at that time by all well-wishers to India, by all Io desired to raise her people in civilization, and to extend to them the blessings of European science, to be a great experiment. We can now hardly conceive of the diffidence bordering upon distrust avith avicit avas at first regarded in the address of Dr. John Grant. Upon the occasion alluded to, we observe the earnest, almost parental solicitude with which he and his colleagues of the Council of Education watched over the success of this infant institution, a success so mainly dependent upon the well-doing of its students. My young friends, he said, I now bid you farewell. Go on in the strength of a good cause and earn for yourselves an honorable name in an untried path. As I have said, you are the first fruits of a great experiment, that of Infra, chasing the native mind from ignorance and dark prejudices. Recollect that the success, to a certain extent, of this most interesting experiment depends upon your future career. A false step on your part might be productive of disastrous consequences to the great cause of native education, to say, not long of the mortification, which any misconduct or failure of yours would inflict upon your teachers, and upon us, your godfathers, as I may say, in the profession. But the students of that day, as well as those who followed them, nobly responded to this earnest appeal. This college is now regarded no longer as an experiment, but as an admirable, beneficent, and established triumph. It is thus honorably spoken of by the bishop and clergy in the address upon the late occasion of the Queen's birthday. Her Majesty will, we are persuaded, be also pleased to learn that the Indian government has succeeded in a truly wonderful manner in diffusing through the land the soundest principles of medical science, that graduates are being educated at the medical college in a manner not inferior to some of the most celebrated schools of medicine in Europe, and that their skill and talents are successfully exerted for the mitigation of Leunian suffering into the various dispensaries of the provinces, whilst the magnificent fever hospital, weekly is now being erected in Calcutta, will not only prove an ornament and blessing to the metropolis of India, but become eminently useful to the school of medicine itself. But the degree of enfranchisement of the native mind and to the power of the measure of our success can scarcely, Bubjeets proposed, be appreciated without reference to Indian medical science, as we found it in this country. I propose, therefore, an examination into the state of medicine here in India, previously to the introduction of European science, and I hope that a comparison of it with medical science among the Greeks may be found both interesting and instructive as a general state. Introduction. Anatomy. 2nd. To the physiology. History of 3rd. Medicine. Patho. Especially as respects logi and practical medicine, for Dr. Royal has shown the extreme probability that chemical science, as well as materia medica, was well advanced in the ancient times of India, that Greeks and Arabs have alike profited by it. But before proceeding further upon this subject, I will say a few words upon your own position and duties. There are perhaps no medical students at this moment in the world to whom such GE privileges are so fully and so freely given of mere sovereign bounty as those which you receive at the hand of Go. Christian Intelliencer, Calcutta, June 1st. See also Hindu Medicine, T.A. Wise, M.D., Calcutta, 1845, p. I 8. Appeal to students. Vernment. This medical school, however regarded, as respects its instructive establishment, its hospitals, its maskins, or the number of patients and students who benefit by it, is now equal to some of the most ancient journals NF Europe, yet so far as I know it stands alone in this, that every advantage is freely given. Here no fees are paid. The finest medical education is freely offered gratis to all comers, of whatever creed, of whatever caste, of whatever clime. No wonder where all is thus freely given, that we find this goodly gathering of students of all kindrels and countries around us, from the Punjab to the Burma Empire, from Ceylon to the snowy mountains of the north. Our young men assemble here without any other jealousy than that of professional honor, any other distinction than that of science. All are equally welcome, equally rewarded, equally respected, if they do well. It has been said, knowledge is power, but knowledge and well-doing are not always synonymous. We sometimes see young men, not behind their fellows in the race of intelligence, lost, confounded, and ruined, having forgotten that man is not only an intelligent, but also a moral being. Do to others as you would be done by is a grand rule for the medical student. Follow it out, and you dare not be idle lure. To be so would stain your humanity, dishonor your profession, disgrace your college. As professor of clinical medicine, my guidance of your studies has been but short, but it has afforded me additional reason to urge upon you the loose principle of reposable humanity. Watch over your patients with this principle true in your hearts, and your minds will seize, with powerful AML tenacion's grasp, the clinical instruction of the professor. It will become sacred duty to record your cases accurately, to think of the earnestly. You will be the first students in the wands. Ami, the last to leave. Your books will be read well, and well remembered, and understood. It was said upon the occasion, your alluded duties to are of fourfold. Our first they duates leaving the college, concern the sick, the profession to which you belong, society, and the government we all have the honor to serve. Of your duties to yourselves, I say nothing, deeming that they are self-evident to you. All these duties are based upon this very simple golden rule, to do to others as we would be done by an inhuman, a dishonest, a licentious medical, at-large practitioner. Is there not in the very expression something that jars upon the moral sense? If a physician be wanting in honor, in humanity, and in rectitude of conduct, what possible security have society for the confidence reposed in him? None. And where are those on the face of the earth, men in whose discretion, honor, and goodness such a large measure of confidence is placed, as in medical men? If they want those qualities, then I emphatically say they want all, for the other qualities are not without the moral ones. Scientific skill and experience are like the sword of the loyal and brave, of use only when in the hands of the honest and true. Personal honor must be the lodestar of Jamoor conduct. Without that, you will only be bringing a reproach upon the fair fame of our profession. You now see before you examples of what courage and conduct will do. Dwarkanath Bose was the first of our gallant band of medical pioneers to return to us with the diploma of the Royal College of Surgeons. He is now one of your teachers of anatomy. Su Rju Ko Omar Chakrabarti, just returned with the diploma of the London University, is assistant Ph. Sishan in our college hospital. Doctors Seal and Bose both held appointments in Tlee City. It is not often that men pass at once from the schools to offices of such importance. In conferring these rewards upon such young men, the government has strongly marked its interest in their welfare and its desire to encourage you. I now revert to the main subjects of this lecture. Among the studies which have the strongest claim upon your attention, anatomy stands first. It is the keystone of medical science, take it away, and there is no stability. This truth is evident from the history of Toy Carfensor of every school, nay, of every individual medical man. For the acquisition of this science, no students possess more ample means and resources than yourselves, subjects abundantly supplied, airy and commodious rooms, and even books and instruments. The use of arsenic as a disinfecting agent preserves the subjects from putrefaction, the dissectors from danger. Since I have been attached to the college, now about 9 years, there never was an instance of death from dissection wounds. In London, hardly a season passed without horrible disease or death from this cause alone. Your library and museum are well supplied with books, as also with anatomical works and preparations. Microscopical anatomy is now most fully elucidated, both in diagrams of great beauty and fidelity, as well as by the daily, at the lectures of the professor of physiology and general anatomy. Remember that the grammar and the groundwork of anatomy is a knowledge of the bones. And when inclined to make difficulties, look at your fellow students of the Hindustani class, who without a knowledge of use of the microscope, the English language, without the same access to books and plates which you possess, do yet attain to a knowledge of this subject. Prejudices against the study of anatomy are not confined to India. I have known the time in England, even when dissections could only be carried on at night. But where there is a will, there is a way, which every earnest student soon makes out, and the way is much easier in Bengal now than in the ancient times of Sushruta, the Galen of India, a rishi of highest rank. The way is pleasanter too, as you will learn. from when the following, a proper body, his direction for purpose. The ancient has been Hindu selected process. The dejections are to be removed, the body washed, and placed in framework of wood, properly secured, by means of grass, hemp, or the like. The body is then to be placed in still water, in a situation in which it will not be destroyed by birds, fishes, or animals. It is to remain 7 days in the water, when it will have become putrid. It is then to be removed to a convenient situation, and with a brush made of reeds, hair, or bamboo bark, the body is to be rubbed so as by degrees to exhibit the skin, flesh, and which are each in their turn to be observed before being removed. In this manner, the different corporeal parts of the body, already enumerated, will be exhibited, but the life of the body is too ethereal to be distinguished by this process. Imagine, gentlemen, the removal of such a body, after 7 days' putrefaction, to a convenient situation. Calcutta. The anatomical system of the ancient Hindus, greatly resembling that of Plato, was precisely as superficial as might have been expected from this very original mode of acquiring anatomical science. It may be judged of by a single sentence, viz., the navel is the origin of all the vessels and is the principal seat of life. This is the Chinese notion, and it was prevalent among the Jews also, with them health to the navel is health to the life. The venerated father of medicine Eve. The great Hippocrates, who lived nearly 1,000 years before Sushruta wrote, had a much more just conception of anatomical science than he, and yet neither his time, nor for 2 centuries later, is there any distinct record of human dissections being practiced by the Greeks. It was not until after the death of Alexander the Great and the institution of the museum at Alexandria, 304 years BC, that the great anatomists Erasistratus and Herophilus recorded their discoveries. In the time of Galen little, even of their works remained extant. Yet had the Greeks noble witnesses of their anatomical skill. Their sculpture even to this very day is unrivaled for its truth and anatomical correctness. The agonizing group of the Laocoon is still the admiration of our time, as it has been of preceding ages. Could Pole, Todorus, Athenodorus, and Agesender of Rhodes have executed such works as this without a practical knowledge of anatomy? I believe it impossible. All the great artists of our times are practical anatomists. They know that expression is effected only by muscular action, and when a Landseer dissects the animals, whose expressions and passions he so wonderfully paints, we may conclude that Phidias even could not work without it. Yet the most perfect specimens of Hindu sculpture, the relievos in their most ancient cavern temples, show nothing that for truth of form can compare with Greek specimens of art. Neither at Ellora nor at Kaidi, not at Elephanta, nor even among the fresco paintings of Ajunta, have I seen anything that would lead me to suppose they had ever attained to a knowledge of the muscles or of their power in expression. From their writings, therefore, and from their specimens of art, it may be concluded that a better knowledge of anatomy than Hindus never attained to this poking in a puddle at a putrid carcass might be supposed to confer. But if other arts and sciences AIE allied to anatomy, physiology, or the knowledge of the healthy, svete, physiology, actions of our bodily organs is, as you well know, immediately based upon it. Ignorance of the one argues the other unknown lilswise to the Hindus. No fact can be more plainly deduced from history than this, that medicine, in every age, has been guided by the prevailing doctrines in physiology. And so pernicious have been these physiological doctrines among the ancients when unsupported by anatomy, so wild, inconsistent, and absurd, leading in practice to such strange vagaries that about the time of Galen, they had well nigh led to the absolute extinction of medical science. We may advantageously refer to some of them. In the days of Hippocrates, the elementary theory was the only one known in Greece. He, as well as Plato, taught that fire, air, earth, and water were the elemental constituents of our bodies. His views, and those which Pythagoras entertained of health and disease, precisely accord with Plato's and the Hindu Sushrutas, when we remember, also, Pythagoras introduced Brahminical institutions into Greece that he, as well as Plato, believed. In the Transmigra, we did Greeks, but traveled never. Hindus that to the power of Sian of souls can have very little doubt that India was the source, whence the Greeks derived their systems of philosophy and of medicme. Or the analogy between the Hindu and Greek systems of medicine is certainly much too close to be the result of accident. Of the Greek philosophers, Thales considered water as the principal element in the composition of our bodies. Minds thought was chiefly concerned Pythagoras gave, fire as the main element Xenophanes formed us of earth, Empedocles sj. The celebrated philosopher of Agrigentum, BC 578, is said to have first united all these various opinions and given to each element its proper share in the composition of our bodies. Thus he explains the formation of the muscles by an unequal admixture of the four elements. The ligaments had a superabundance of fire and of earth. Bone had a greater quantity of earth and of water, and so forth. It appears, therefore, gentlemen, that having found the stuff, these wise men hardly knew what to do with it in order to make a man. But the Greek writers become more intelligible to us moderns, especially Plato, through the severer abstractions of the Hindus. The Hindus, for instance, boldly and fairly embody qualities. These qualities form elements of the elements. Fire. These, air, earth, tle existences form atoms, or the grosser bodies and water to which the Hindu superadded ether, ahasa. The Hindu sage Sushruta says when digestion is accomplished, the respective elements unite with those which had entered into the formation of the body. The earth unites with earth, water with water, A and C, and they, acting on the inherent qualities of each of the five elements, mix and increase those in the body. Smell, the property of earth, with that of the body. Taste with water, touch with air, and sound with ether. This is exactly what Empedocles taught, viz., that sensations take place only through the affinity of elements composing the object perceived, with the elements of the perceptive organs or senses. He says, by the earthy element, we perceive earth by the watery, water the air of heaven, by the aerial, Rai, clement and devouring tire, by the element of brie. This, Pasenjaimes being commented up the by Aristotle, and by Galangi tumeo fertulis jura, but it is clearly interpeated by Hindu Gofloripli, a 5 ml homtifili paraplumol, by Milton. Both procates anal Plato declare, BC 470, the WW of the boily TA consist of 4, blood, phlegm, black a yellow bile. Charaka and Susiruta, any air, bile, plelem, blul, are the chief humors of the body. They are kalel laithera, pillars of the system. If they be deranged, they are the cause of diverse, without then the individual could not exist. They assert that as long as the elements remain in due proportion, he body remains in health. When May 1st is increased or diminished, disease resoars. The sensation of disuse agrees precisely with Hippocrates and with Pero. Platoi equal to the disproportion of. The physici lomens of thy body is the proximate mans of all, since the marrow, the bones, the muscles, and the ligaments consist of the elements, as also the blood and the jure derived from them. Disproportion of the elements produces degeneration of the humors, and that degeneration again causes the different diseases. Thus far in physiology, the Hindus and Greeks are one. Now, gentlemen, we must examine how this elemental, sole philosophical basis of Greek, 2. Pathology and Hindu medicine is made to account for diseases. Hippocrates taught that the combination of the four elements into the four states or qualities with which they were affected, of hot, cold, moist, and dry, gave rise to the four fluids or humors, of the body blood, phlegm, bile, and black bile, which originally tended to produce the four temperaments, and which, in their turn, contributed to the excess or defect of each of the humors. Hence arose the pathological doctrines, which, under the denomination of the humoral pathology, became the prevailing opinion of all sects and of all theorists, until the commencement of the 18th century. Cycle of Pract, Med, 1, P, She. Again, Plato was a great genius, for his thoughts on some matters have been powerfully impressive. But any one of you could confute his pathology, and smile at his absurd conceit in meddling with medicine. He conjectured, and his followers vainly thought conjecture would suffice, that the deliquescence of bone and of flesh produces black and yellow bile, which passing in the vessels and mixing with the blood become fruitful sources of disease. Degeneration of the marrow induces the most malignant and even mortal maladies. A still common. After this he comes to the true Hindu doctrine, and bile, with as much fallacy, deals out diseases of air, of phlegm, and of gravity, as Charalx himself, who says, these humors being ill, you're of all our ills the root. And Amurus Catalogi eat gives 80 diseases of air, BNYA, 40% of bil, pitta, 20% of plaligan, hafa, besides their compounds. But to return to the divine Plato, pray attend to his pathological details, and then compare them with the Hindu doctrine which follows. He says, when air is deranged, ail out the chest. Difficult breathing and wasting consumptions follow, When air is deranged in the joints or about the back, it causes tetanic upon, violent pains and convulsions so difficult of caro, and also fervors. When phlegm and air wheeleroggle together, papillar eruptions result, if combined with black chyle, aqueous lowel affections, and epilepsy. Ping is the origin of all the various kinds of defluxions, besides Ottlier ailments, from inflammation of the BDE, exalting its natural hunt, woe lava breaking outwards, abscesses and tum, zero inwardly. It may cause painful barning and destructive neoratuous, the style may be impeded, or, altered by PTs and chyle, it will then corrupt the various structures, till it relie the bones, and even marrow, barrow the canals of life are broken, and like a ship loosened from her anchorage, Philo departs he, Lila, diempteri ogle diarrhea arise from phlegm superfinity. Of fire is the cause of continual fever, quotidians are alno to an excess of air, torsions to that of water, and quartans to that of archit. Now Gantimon, let us son what the Hindu Snata says, when air is demooged in the blood, it prosgoes different painful eruptions and tumors. When deranged with fat, it pronounces tumors without pain. In Ness, it produces contextation of air size with pain and fullness. In tendons, it produces paralysis, while shaking pain and spasm. In joints, it produces stiffness, pain, swelling, and emaciation. In the bones, it produces pain and emaciation. In the marrow, it causes acute pain. It produces rigidity of parts, apotanoka by which the body is drawn aside, or backwards or forwards, tetanus. And there is another form of the disease called hunus stamba, trismus. It affects particularly the lower jaw and face by drawing the neighboring parts to one side or another. Korea, St. Vitus's dance, Halaya Kunja, is according to the Nedena, and Sushruta also produced by derangements of air. Observe also that the very same causes, the seasons, which are assigned by Hippocrates. Sushruta also gives for build increasing in hot weather, phlegm in cold. When exposed to anger, to hot weather, especially during the months of September and October, and the middle of the day, or middle watch of the night, the bile is increased. When bile is in unusual quantity, it produces a disagreeable breath, hot and sour eructations, with boils over the body. The person is subject to fits of anger, his bowels are open, the skin distended, and he staggers as if drunk, his body is hot, the perspiration copious. When air is deranged with bile, it produces inflammation and fainting, with phlegm, coldness, and swelling of the affected part. Loith, blooded, produces a degree of pain like the penetration of a needle, sometimes deprivation of healthy sensation and other symptoms of deranged bile. As for cold, whey, the derangements of phlegm are more liable to occur in the dewy, cold, and spring. Third of the day, and after eating, a fullness of the abdomen, and the food the person eats, not properly digested, he has no appetite, and his body is. Thus far, we have Sushruta upon bile, there, and its product cold phlegm, he says, months, during the first produce, pale, heavy, cold, and liard. The cure of these derangements is accompanied by the use of dry food. Now, gentlemen, I leave Plato and Hippocrates. You will, I think, agree with me, DMF. They are one in theory with Hindu sages Susamruta and Chataka. If you really enter into their principles of the elemental theory, you will find in them the guide to ancient books upon Melian. I have particularly twent upon the opinions of these two Selehedal Greeks, as representing in fact the two great classes of medical men, till Galen, who in a book devoted to the purpose, De Hippocrates et Platonis Decritis, endeavored to harmonize their principles. One class were dazzled with the lofty conceptions nud captivating eloquence of Piato, their Fulev, she more exact observation of naturo, and the Eotian's induction from experience, so conspicuous in his great contemporary. These last were so low, however, at the Dini when the illustrious Galen appeared, that real practical medicine, as before mentioned, was well, nigh o'erwhelmed. Besunt the foreign pomp of various sciences mud dogwas, November did Galax Lamself over-attain to the truthful simplicity of the Cohen physician in clinical medicine. The Hindu doctrines, based upon the Vedas and Shastras, ever continued in India immutably the same. In Greece, Atul. Rome, great was the strife between the different sects in applying their various theories to the art of medicine. Yet dogmatists, Methodists, and empirics never wholly rejected the elemental theory. In the system of Galax himself, especially in his therapeutics, it holds a prominent place. He conceives that the properties of all medicines are derived from what he calls their elementary or cantonal qualities: heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. Each of these qualities is, again, subdivided into 4 degrees, and a plant or medicine, according to his notion, is cold or hot in the first, second, third, or fourth gradation, if the disease be Hot or cold in any of these four stages, a medicine possessed of a contrary quality, mole in the same proportionate degree of elementary heat, or cold, must be prescribed. This is a strange web of philosophical fiction. Yet a general belief in the hot and cold inherent qualities of medicines at this day pervades the whole of Indian. The most illiterate coolie, as well as the Athos learned pundit, explains the action of medicines upon this Galenical principle only. That the immortal Galen should be led away to such an absurd hypothesis only proves the power of preconceived ideas. In more important matters, the intelligence of this great man could wrestle against the prevailing nations, and spurn with indignation the inipious opinions, never imputed to the ancient Hindu sages, that the glorious organization of the Iraman frame is the mere fortniton's aggregation of atoms, brought together by blind chance. With an admirable exertion of his reasoning powers, he could, undid infer from the exquisite mechanism of the thing muds, that there must be a maker. What, he says, you see a conkle, you infer it was made to lie upon, if a boat, that it was made for boating in, if a house, its doors, its windows, and the proportion of its rooms would lead you to infer it was made for leonine habitation. Yet you can look at man's eye, at Moo's hurt, at man's hand even, and believe these all chance work. Isle breaks out into this remarkable passage. Who this god may be, I know not, but unknown, I adore. Again, in his book WPM, The Nays of Parts, he says but to waste words upon such brutisly people is only to be censured by better men, who will deem it but a profanation of the sacred gift of speech of that language, by which I now compose this book, a real hymn to the praise of our great Creator. For, in my opinion, true religion consists not so much in sacrificing 10,000s of bulls upon his altars, nor in offering before him costly incense and fragrant perfumes, as in first themselves apprehending him and then making known unto others his unerring wisdom, his resistless power, his all-diffusive goodness. For to have beautified all his works with such appropriate grace, to have excluded nothing from participation in his benefits, is a most manifest proof of ineffable goodness, a goodness most worthy of our hymns of praise. Whilst to have known how best to effect this highest perfection of his works declares his infinite wisdom. His almighty and all-sufficient power is seen in this, that all things are made by his own sovereign will. These were the sublime conceptions of Galen. It would do us no harm if, in our investigations and studies, we could imitate his piety. This tones and strengthens the spirit for those deep researches in which he was so successful. His comprehensive mind was trained that the and nerves led on were by not his O'Haefern experiments to conclude ligaments as they seemed to bow to others, but conductors of sensation and motion. By that means the arteries of a subtle and animal left ventricle, spirit, passeneer, of the, through their tubes, heart section contained blood, not air, as was then believed, and for 1,000 years afterwards, until our great countryman, Harvey reproduced proofs to the contrary, derived from Galen. Again, that the lungs got rid of the fuliginous part of the blood, that blood in the veins was darker than that in the arteries, that mastomosis took place between the extreme vessel. Lastly, that the valves of the heart prevented regurgitation of blood was distinctly asserted by him, when we see him proving, in spite of all cavil, that the void did it proceed from the head as though not declaral, but from the larynx. That arteries do not degenerate into nerves, as Paxagoras affirmed that the heart is not the seat of integument, as said to be by Chrysippus, but the brain. That the carotid arteries do not carry spirit to the brain, as Isastratus maintained, but blood when we see bones. And ligaments, joints and muscles, and viscera and senses described, reverentially admired and understood, we are constrained to admit that he was really worthy of that glorious estimation in which he was held, a fame to which no one in our profession has since attained. For to the right methods of investigation which Galen introduced, F.E., experiment as opposed to can, joctore, medicine owes its establishment as a science, umi, its emancipation from false theories and absurd conceits. Grand steps are these which I love enumerated towards our percent physiology, few of which appear to have been known to this Hindus. They knew, however, of the existence of the lacteals, which he did not, nor we either, until 1615. They ascertained that the chyle, globule, got its rod color in the spleen, which is, I think, probable. But so prodigious are the attainments of some men nowadays, so intuitive their subjanta genius, that they exclaim against the folly of searching out medical opinions. Before the time of John Hunter was a history of medicine, great Malge Astley co-opper, and joy in Middle Ages. Abernethy too were eminent, but they might have learned from a greater still. Both these sui gens taught that a broken spine was incurable. So I believed, but tried to reduce one once, here in Calcutta, and curbed my patient. But when, elated with my success, I was about to publish this novel and one day full case, I found Galen had been before me, had got it all in his boo. I remember too a case, not mine, of removing a piece of the sternum, and so exposing the heart to relieve matter pressing upon it, behind the bone. This was quoted as a daring feat of modern surgery. I found it done 16 centuries ago, and old Galen rather glorifies himself thereupon. For 1,000 years at least, wherever medicine was taught as a science, the works of Galen were appealed to as infallible. With a regard not less reverential than that of the Hindus for their Vedas and Shastras, did the Christian world of Europe and the Moslem world of Asia look to him as respects matters medical. He and Avicenna, his successful imitator, were the chief authorities upon medicine during that long dark night, when monkish superstition overshadowed and well nigh extinguished in Europe the light of science. The invention of printing in 1440 and the glorious Reformation dispelled this Egyptian darkness. The mind of Europe awoke, but no such light broke upon India until the institution of this college, as regards the in Medicinae India Liad, not advanced one step since invaded by Alexander. In Europe, even Tlio's powerful levers of modern medical science, chemistry, and the microscope have but lately burst open the hidden secrets of physical made till a very recent period in tense, and finally dispelled the elemental theory. Little progress had been the examination of the nature of bodies as opposed to their movement. May be well understood from this fact that, in the popular works on science which were in circulation in our own childhood, fire, air, earth, and water were still represented as the four elements of the universe. To what point the inquiry into these subjects may be canned hereafter, it seems impossible to anticipate. The doctrine of atoms, us to the very elements of physical existence, while the study of the phenomena of electricity, of magnetism, and above all of what is called animal magnetism, seems to promise that in the course of years, or it may be of centuries, we may arrive at some glimpses of the relations of physical and moral, appears indeed to be bringing a yet higher mystery, existence towards each other, and the principle of animal life. During these Middle Ages, little was added of importance to medical science. India was perhaps in advance of Europe as respects practical medicine. Anatomy was not taught by dissections till in 1315, Mondini di Luzzi publicly demonstrated at Bologna in Italy. The Arabs, more strictly fettered by their religious creed than the Hindus, were prohibited absolutely from the practical study of anatomy. Whatever they did know upon the subject they derived from the Greeks, and Galen was their chief authority. Or many years after I became attaclicked to this college, the Stylans who formed the great majority of the Hindustani class, being Mohammedans, it was supposed impossible to engage them in practical dissections. Many an earnest consultation have I had with Pundit Madhusudan Gupta upon this subject. He was sanguine of success as respects them, if in dissection they should be allowed the same opportunities with the English class. When the dissecting rooms were placed by government under my shaigi, the wish of my good friend was accomplished, and he did succeed, with one or two exceptions, in engaging the military students of the class in actual practical dissections. I had at that time, and have often had it since, the great satisfaction of recording publicly the efficient attainments of this class of students, taught in the Urdu language, their only manual of anatomy, the notes they had taken at the pundit's lectures. The admirable perseverance of these young men overcame all difficulties under the kindly guidance of their preceptor. This college achieved another triumph, and Pundit Madhusudan Gupta gained another laurel, Aven. For the first time in India, at all events, Mohammedans were seen in classes, engaged in dissections, studying anatomy in their own language. We must all rejoice at the success of this great experiment, which has, in the vernacular tongue, brought within the grasp of the people that knowledge which is of all others the foundation of medical science. Now that the splendid work upon anatomy, which my colleague Dr. Mua has completed in the Urdu language, is in the hands of these students, their difficulties are much less. It is, I apprehend, the first work upon the subject, which has been compiled for Mohammedan students since the time of Galen. We have seen that neither in anatomy, nor in physiology, nor in pathology even, did the ancient Hindus ever so much as get into the right road. The Greeks did. They studied anatomy by dissection, physiology by experiment, by observation, and by the light of comparative anatomy, as the works of Aristotle, who had charge of that great museum formed at Alexandria, where animals were assembled from all parts of the world, at such a vast expense sufficiently indicate. There is nothing in the Hindu authors that I know of that deserves the name of clinical medicine. Yet the cases left us by Hippocrates are recorded with so much care, so much accuracy, and so much of what I may call propriety, by which I mean the proportion which each part bears to the whole, that they are models of imitation to this day. They are, in fact, just such abstracts as I, in this theater, have repeatedly urged you to make out from your own daily history of cases. When the case is closed, all the great features should be boldly drawn, the treatment briefly indicated, and the result stated. Now, gentlemen, you see that such acute reasoners as were morbid anatomy, greater than registered trademarky, not by mere reasoning and conjecture, understand or explain disease. And if you analyze your almond knowledge, you will, and that besides your anatomy and physiology, 60, widely extended beyond theirs, you have been taught to understand diseased actions by means of morbid anatomy. This study, which has beyond all others contributed in modern times to the progress of our art, and which was scarcely known to the ancients, seems to have grown up almost accidentally under those great men who in Italy first taught publicly by human dissections. The bodies were procured from the hospitals, which Avere at first established rather as refuges for the destitute than as infirmaries for the sick. But the great Florgani never let pass any opportunity of injuring into the cause of death in the bodies upon which he publicly demonstrated. All his facts were recorded and complied with those he could obtain from others, and his great work, De Sedibis et Causis Morbiruviae, was the result. In Europe, the schools of medicine generally rose up in the neighborhood of hospitals. Others followed in the tract of the great Morgaggi, and morbid anatomy is now a science. Clinical exponents and is-iorbid anatomy are our best UEDs to a knowledge of disease. In 1843, the museum of our college was constituted by the orders of government a central depot for pathological contributions from every part of the Indian Empire. The conservation, arrangement, and classification of the specimens was for many years a part of my office. You now see assembled Fayum, all pates of India preparations of diseased structure, an Indian museum of morbid anatomy. In order to make it more generally useful, I published a work founded upon these specimens, which I hope may yet be completed. In this Pathologia Indica, I have been zealously aided by we own students, and I have gratefully recorded it. But we must go on. Yug friends, the work is for you and those who come after to complete. Do not think even when you leave this college that all is done. Remember the melancholy catalogue of diseases which are not yet understood, are not cured. Leprosy, phthisis, cholera, and elephantiasis are such, besides a long list of nervous disease, the scandala medicorum. But what could the ancients do in explaining disease without this knowledge of morbid anatomy? If you are not weary, we will see how they applied their theories. Suppose W examined diseases of the eye, according to Sushruta's pathology. He says the flesh of the eye being produced from the earth, the blood from the air, the black parts from the air, the white parts from the water, and the canals for the tears from the ether. Its inflammations are of 4 kinds, produced by derangement of the humors. Air, hyle, and blood the humors, WDIN diseased, passing into. Of blood it is said, if diseased, it will des in 5 days. If phlegm in 7 days, if air in 6 days, if bile in 1 day. Now, the eye being transparent, we can see what goes on in. A modern Suijian sees ulcers in the cornea. He knows that their cicatrization may render this part of the eye. If the ulcer progress, layer after layer of the cornea may give way, and the internal humors be attacked with inflammation. The pupil may be closed by adhesion and the access of light to the retina. The lens itself or its capsule becomes opaque. Now, in all these instances, there is blood, phlegm, and bile, but by the actual phlegm vessels of the eye, troy the organ, disease, permanently opaque. If the iris, coated, intercepted, and blindness follows, no vague idea respecting surgeon directed in his methods of cure, is condition of the structures which Ho has for himself observed. In like manner, if we thus take, when disease of produced, tli heart, and examine. Sushruta's views, by deranged air, it is said to be accompanied by acute pain. When by deranged bile, it produces fainting by phlegm. The patient feels heaviness at the heart. The methods of cure are directed specially to each of these conditions. Now what does morbid anatomy shew us? We look in our museum at the stricture of the heart diseased and find in one instance that its muscular veils are thickened, or to double, see them, their reduced usual size, producing one set of symptoms to the thinness, or that of it's an orange peel with another set of symptoms. Cavities are greatly contracted or preternaturally dilated, or its valves will not act, for they may have become torn or ulcerated or encrusted with vegetations. In each of these conditions, I've discerned a cause. We even find in some of these the heart which retard the blood, making it to stagnate in the returning vessels, as the branches of the venous cavity JB, a proximate cause for various kinds of dropsy. But if AAE were to search for the causation of this last disease in the of Susruta or Charaka or any other Hindu sage, we still find the same story of heat disease. 3 kinds are 3. Produced aven by 2. Air, humors bile and are phlegm, deranged, WDIN, affected, 1. Aven, separately, 3. Are deranged at the same time. F. These 4 avards, air, blood, phlegm, bile, as fully explain the mysteries of Hindu pathology as Pax Vobiscum, represents in the mouth of Wamba, the son of Witless, all requisite learning, all monkish theology, for the existing symptoms, lesions of everythings. It has been said that practical medicine among the ancient Hindus had attained to greater eminence than the ruins of their pathology, which we have been considering, would indicate. In therapeutics, we do hear of cures nowadays of epilepsy and lepra by combinations of drugs reputed to be of great antiquity. Professor Hoyle, that Greeks and Arabs borrowed from their materia medica in midwifery, find that embryotomy was practiced and rules laid down for delivery. In surgery, lithotomy is described, operations for new ears and noses, for piles, fistula, cataract, and C. But among the ruins of ancient Hindu medicine, the practice of mesmerism may, I think, be mentioned as most curious. By passes and breathings, those itinerant priests of Aesculapius, the Ja Playong Natualis, profess to cure, and do cure rheumatism, palsy, epilepsy, just such as mesmerism is known to cure. Assiduously muttering their munters, they yet continue to make passes from head to foot, the body of the operator being kept steadily in contact or relation with his patient. To these and these only may fairly be attributed the cure. And so general is the practice that there is hardly a village in India in which it does not exist. In the mesmeric hospital, so successfully established by government in the city, under the superintendence of Dr. E.S.D. Aile, you have all witnessed. The, or, pover you might, of animal, have magnedon. So, at any time these last 2 years, ism to render the human frame absolutely insensible to pain during the most formidable operations of suxgeri. But, still more importance, you might have seen also, avat is of the power of this subtle agent to cure different forms of paralysis. A Hindu studex davas brought to me as acting professor of medicine by one of your fellow students, probably now pre-sent, from a place some 25 miles off. The patient could express himself BV writing in Persian or in Bengali, but had been dumb for 1.5 years after coma and fever. The tongue was immovably retracted. Pai was said to have consulted in vain most eminent physicians in this city. I advised mesmerism. The liberality of Dr. Esdaile provided means. He was cured in his hospital by his native mesmerizers in about a fortnight, and can now speak as well as ever he did. This is not a solitary instance. The practicability, which has been daily demonstrated in the mesmeric hospital in this city, of performing the most dreadful operations of surgery without pain to the patient, must be regarded as the greatest medical triumph in our own days. I cannot now recall without astonishment at what I witnessed the extirpation of a cancerous eye, while the man looked at me unwinkingly, unflinchingly, with the other eye. Another man looked dreamingly on with half-closed eyes, the whole time of an operation, even whilst I examined the nature of the malignant tumor I had removed, and then, having satisfied myself, concluded the operation. The use of chloroform and other anesthetic agents, which are universally adopted now, followed as necessarily upon the discovery of tele-anesthetic power of animal magnetism, as did the use of the ligature to suppress bleeding. Upon the discovery of circulation, now the surgeon being able to command the effusion of blood, either by pressing upon the blood vessels or tying them, and by mesmerism or chloroform to render his operation painless, there seems little left to desire in surgery but real anatomical skill. But in justice also to the Hindus, we may add that it is very probable that at a time, 1460, Aven in Europe Colot, an eminent surgeon, was obliged to beg a man's life from the gallows in order to prove that the operation of lithotomy was not necessarily fatal. This very operation was in corn, neon used by the Baidyas of India. But here again, gentlemen, how vast the difference between the marvelous rapidity and success of this operation in the hands of your professor CF surgery and the rude barbarism of Sushbuta. At the native hospital, I have seen large stones crushed in the bladder, and thus removed by my former colleague, Dr. Jackson, without pain and without cutting at all, or if cutting be required, the patient is first made insensible to pain by chloroform. In a report of that hospital, which has just been published, 1850, It is said it cannot fail to be a subject of thankfulness and gratification to the governors, to be assured that in 132 operations which have been performed the years 1848 and 1849, not one case has occurred in which death could be traced to yet it was used in all of them. In the native hospital during use of chloroform, I find the operation for cataract is fairly described by Sushputa. It was generally practiced in this country before we arrived. It is probable, too, that even at a time when the princes of Europe could find no oculist and were obliged to send into Asia, this operation was common in India. It is very true that the itinerant Baidyas do occasionally poke out eyes, but it is equally true that I have seen in various parts of India many eyes to which they had restored sight. The glory, therefore, of introducing this operation into India does not fairly belong to us. In a modified sense, only can we claim for this college the praise so eloquently accorded by Colonel Sykes. I affirm, he says, that this faculty given to a single native to perform the godlike office of restoring the blind of his countrymen to sight is a more glorious monument. Cleon. All the works of art that human pride or human ambition have ever burthened the earth with is for you, gentlemen, to raise that peaceful trophy to a wise government for founding this college, which its eloquent advocate, already quoted, desires. Do but succeed, and then with him, I say, and with a thorough conviction of the truth of my assertion, in case the seeds of knowledge a general and luxurious harvest, that we a monument compared with which those of Ashoka, Chundragupta, and Shah Jahan, or any other, have sown fructify to shall have left. Indian potentate sink into insignificance. And now, gentlemen, if you contrast the means by which we endeavor to instruct you in the science, curriculum of studies, of medicine, with those which one have erste alluded to as practiced by the ancients, you will, I think, find reason to congratulate yourselves. Medicine is not an exact science in itself, but we endeavor to furnish you with exact knowledge of sciences, of which may be applied to the ever-varying forms of disease. Your early studies will be first chemistry, second, botany, third, materia medica, and fourth, anatomy. Of the application of anatomy, I need say no more. Perhaps I have already magnified my office, but without it you can do nothing. By a knowledge of chemistry, you see that the air, the earth, and the water are themselves compound bodies, and are decomposed and changed by our own living organism, in which composition and decomposition are perpetually going on, the used up and effete parts of our bodies being thrown out by one set of organs, and new matter assimilated from our food, deposited by another set of organs. Even in diseased processes, noxious PIO ducts are generated, often to be detected by chemical tests. By one of the most admirable combinations of profound thoughts to which our age can point, M. Liebig has led us to the conception that all our motive power is derived from the processes of digestion and nutrition, and all our animal heat, motive power, and the so-called animal magnetism is associated, says Baron Reichenbach, from respiration. In other words, both our heat are derived from chemical action, animal heat, and comes, goes, flows out, and is dissipated, like it the chemical action of the body which yields heat, yields also, he says, crystalline force, magnetism, or whatever we choose to call this peculiar influence. This is the origin of the force which flows in a polar form, from our hands and fingers as from a magnet. Botany signifies no longer a mere catalogue of plants. It is not studied only to identify those numerous plants which are used as medicines. It now assumes, as a branch of medical instruction, a most important place. Its microscopical demonstrations, so simple, so exquisitely beautiful, have an immediate application to the structural anatomy of our own bodies. The production of cells, the growth of cells, the arrangement of cells, whether flattened into membranes or elongated into tubes, are demonstrated with such a clear simplicity as can scarcely be attained in animal bodies. The structural anatomy of plants, therefore, so constantly shown at the lecture of the professor of botany, forms a delightful introduction to human structural anatomy. The production of oil and fat in plants through the intervention of cells is so like that which we observe in animals that the difference is hardly to be detected, but in plants you see the mode of its production. When we find fat occupying the place of the muscular structure of the heart in man, or blocking up the liver, and oil globules even in the interior of the muscular fiber, Tilly's disease reminds us of vegetable growth. Colloid and cancer appear to grow with their own independent vegetative vitality. The line of demarcation between healthy and diseased growths is often not easily found. Besides this, real vegetable growths are produced, increase, and multiply in the living human body, and constitute disease, especially upon mucous membranes. One remarkable instance of this in the air passages occurred in a patient of mine in Calcutta. She coughed, vegetable membrane, Add up lumps of fat and flakes of more than would suffice to cover twice over the whole of the air tubes, which they occasionally blocked up, to the imminent hazard of suffocation. This vegetable mold of fungi and fuci commenced growing about the end of the rains, when in Bengal the hat you take off at night is moldy before morning. It required a most intimate acquaintance with the elementary forms of animal and vegetable tissues, and the aid of chemistry and the microscope to detect their real nature. In this instance, it is to the professor of physiology I owe from his lectures you how the recent discoveries cellular growths will learn the discovery of normal, plain the production of diseased cellular growths. Him you will acquire also a knowledge of floating cells, of the blood. The professor of materia medica requires your knowledge of chemistry and of botany and of physiology as preliminary to your understanding the composition of drugs and their operation as medicines. Right. Peculiar virtues, or understanding of the healthy condition of the blood must precede our knowledge of its diseases and of their remedies. Tlese, again, is only acquired by the study of microscopic anatomy and the chemistry of molecular matter. Thus it was the observation of the deficiency of red globules in the blood of the tuberculous, which is always accompanied by deficiency or vitiation of the fibrine, that first suggested the propriety of employing iron. In that diathesis, and a similar deficiency of carbon, or the oil globule in the elaborated chyle, which is also always accompanied by some defect of the fibrine, in like manner led to the use of the cod liver oil. You will see, therefore, my young friends, that these sciences, anatomy, chemistry, and botany, engage your attention during the first years of your studios. General anatomy and physiology, the theory and practice of medicine, the operative parts of medicine, surgery, and midwifery will then be studied under their special professors, and their actual application pointed out in the wards of the athletical hospital, of the surgical hospital, and of the female hospital. This is what is called technically Isoalding the hospitals, where you observe diseases for yourselves, aided by these preliminary studies, and clinical instruction from your professors. The general application of medical science to legal investigations will be shown by our new professor of medical jurisprudence. But believe me, gentlemen, that you are greatly mistaken if you think that your work is ended when you get your diplomas in we profession. You must ever continue to be students. You cannot even stand still. It is when you leave this college that he most valuable art 34 begins. Then you must apply with all earnestness to educate yourselves in the observation and treatment of dissents. Record your observations, reflect on your observations, and communicate with others upon the results. It is only in this way that vut science malvancos. Imlia presents for you a fine field of observatio. I trust that the graduates of our college, now a Mamarone band of well-educated men, will find some means of communicating and publishing the facts they may discover. I should be glad that any observations of mine should lead to a result so practically important. Bombay and Madras both possess flourishing schools of medicine. It is not likely, therefore, that you will lack competitors for fame. Finally, I would conclude in the words of a true friend of yours, the Honorable Me Mille, and they are words of weighty import. Consider seriously the nature of the honorable profession you have chosen. It will be yours God's blessing resting upon your labors, to assuage bodily pain, to prevent fatal or disabling effects of the many injuries and disorders to which the human frame, in the varied circumstances of life, is liable, to restore sight to the blind, and oftentimes to prolong life, when to all outward appearance it is hinstoning to its close. These NRO grant talents committed to you. See that you duly improve them. This, gentlemen, is the mobile charter of our profession. Do good unto all men. And now, with every good wish for your future success in life, I heartily bid you farewell. The end.